What's up, guys? Welcome to another edition of Before the Whistle, presented by BRK Insurance Group. If your business is looking for the best in employee benefits, commercial property and casualty insurance, or retirement and 401k plan services, there's no one better suited to meet your challenges and build a plan centered around your needs than BRK Insurance Group. What's going on, y'all? Welcome back to Before the Whistle. I'm your host, Maddy, and it's been a fun 2 weeks in a row recapping some really overwhelmingly dominant victories for the Tulane Green Wave. Coming off of their 45-10 win over the USF Bulls, there was a little bit of shell shock for, I think, a lot of people after that game, where I think that feeling of dominance, for me, it really hasn't been something I've palpably been able to feel since that final stretch of games in the Cotton Bowl season, where you really felt like this team all just clicked at the same time. They were firing on all cylinders, and they looked pretty unstoppable. That's something that you're seeing at a really expedited pace here for this year's team. And I think what is an important thing here to talk about as well is just, I think the mental part of things is so important, and the mental pressures of things like expectations. It's hard for me to ignore whether or not that probably had somewhat of an effect on the team as a whole last year. Whereas, yeah, there are high, lofty expectations coming into this year because of Jon Sumrall and his prowess and all of the players that they were able to bring in and retain. But there was so much unknown about this team that I think operating in a little bit of silence to start the year worked a little in their favor. Now, that being said, there was only about a week of time for that before they had to face those two Power 5 opponents where, yes, we're probably going to keep looking at those losses as the year goes on and as the rankings happen, and whether or not, Tulane pulls one of those off, they're probably in the rankings. Let's just be upfront about that. But to me, that question then going to whether or not you should schedule those types of games, I think what you're seeing happen with Tulane now is a result of playing those types of games. I think it's also just the result of the right coach and the right fit, the right philosophy, and the right connection with the guys on the field. And to me, that has been the overwhelming takeaway more than anything else with Jon Sumrall and these guys, where a question coming off of that win against USF was, I wonder what their focus level is going to be like going into this game ahead of the bye week. I'm saying that and I'm laughing because 71-20, Tulane hasn't scored 70 points since the 1998 season. It was their most largest, that 51-point margin, I believe, is their largest since 1939. It's the fifth most points scored by a team in the American Conference in its history since 2013. And as Corey Glore pointed out on Twitter, Tulane now holds the active longest winning streak in the conference, active conference regular season winning streak, whatever it is, with 12 straight. That's the important thing. But these last two have been just completely something different. It wasn't a fluke. And yes, there's been some coaching woes, to put it kindly, going on over at UAB, but that doesn't explain how dominant Tulane was in all three phases, and especially the performances you saw from freshmen out there a lot of the time. Where, yes, Tulane put their backups in pretty early in the second half of that game. UAB, I saw one of the announcers, I think, said some teams just don't know when they've been conquered. Tough scene, but that was kind of what was going on. They were refusing to lay down, fair enough. But Tulane's backups then got pretty good experience against who they left in as starters till the end of that game. I've always said it's hard for me to break down these overwhelming victories. From a coverage perspective, I personally think it's easier to cover losses just because you can look at where things went wrong. Maybe that's my background in the legal field where things go wrong. That's the start of everything. But I've always said, with things like SAT, SHGRE or whatever, where the advice my dad gave me was always to just disagree with what the point was, because it doesn't sound that valuable and then I agree because this, and then I agree because that. And that's somewhat, I'm rewatching this game trying to find some insight here, and it's just so overwhelming that it's almost hard to do. So I'm going to do a little bit of a roundtable on this episode and point to some areas in that game, but really, not giving a grade so much, but just a midseason review of offense, defense, special teams. And I just think the overall buy-in and philosophy to the head coach as a whole. So starting on the offensive side of the ball, what we've seen in these first couple of games, 6 games for Tulane now, has been really incredible. I think that you've seen that side really gel, really find such a great rhythm in all of these games, and really start to see Joe Craddock start to find his own with his personnel, with the rhythm of games, and really how to use these playmakers to the best of their ability. Something I keep pointing out, but I really find fascinating, and as I just got off a radio call talking a lot about the Saints, something that I really noticed as a parallel with the way that Tulane uses Ty Thompson is while I think that they use him in such a creative way, and he's been an extremely important part of these last, especially 2 wins for Tulane, including really all season, it doesn't feel as if the offense starts and ends with Ty Thompson in the way that a lot of the Saints offensive scheme is dependent on Taysom Hill as a player. But I also feel like the feel that Joe Craddock has for putting in Ty Thompson, it's really impressed me. I think back to the early usage of Taysom Hill for the Saints and the fact that it just didn't always feel that seamless or natural. And it felt like sometimes drives got stifled where, Drew Brees was in a rhythm here or there. But I think you've really seen how well they've utilized him and how much of a wrinkle that really has given opponents on film. You think back to that pirouette play where unfortunately the pass didn't go as intended for Ty Thompson. He sailed it. He did a lot better as he really settled in as the quarterback later on in that game. But the amount of things that Tulane can do with having 2 quarterbacks lined up there that can run and can pass and can hand it off here and there, it's really, really interesting. To me, what's been really fun and I think has been an important thing when I'm looking at kind of this review of what the offense has looked like. We all know that Mekhi Hughes is an absolute superstar. I thought there was a marked improvement in his running style and Arnold Barnes in this past week. Something I noticed early on in practice last Monday was Brock Hayes, the running backs coach, having an emphasis on high knees and high stepping it. And I made this joke, but if you put Crisco on Mekhi Hughes' ankles, he would quite literally be unstoppable. The only way opponents have been able to bring him down, and oftentimes Arnold Barnes, is really wrapping up their ankles and just bringing them down like that. It makes a difference when you're able to rise your knees up. We do a lot of that in soccer. So I'm very familiar with high knees. It just felt like they were breaking through those levels with a little bit of pep in their step. But then you see the way Jamari McClure played at the end of the game. To me, his burst is unlike anything we have in that room for Tulane. It was really fascinating to see how well these running backs have come in at random points in the games and have really flashed and shown their own running style. It's a really deep room out there for Tulane. The fact that the first game of the year, we were kind of looking at the fact that Tulane had 8 different rushers, and it was like, okay, well, this is a game against, it was a good FCS opponent, still an FCS opponent, one Tulane was able to put away convincingly with the shutout. And so it was hard to really say what you can surmise from a team you know pretty much nothing about that is just kind of trotting people out there at this point. Counting this up from last weekend, they had 6 different rushers, if you will. They had 6 rushing touchdowns. I mean, that is legitimately insane. Yes, 2 of those came from Mekhi Hughes. 1 of those came from Jamari McClure. 2 came from Arnold Barnes. 1 from Ty Thompson. And the fact that Mekhi Hughes led the day with another 100-yard game, he only had 15 carries. That is such a stark contrast from a lot of the usage we've seen of Mekhi Hughes in some of these games where they've really had to put the game on his shoulders. He had 17 last week, but he had 23 against the Ragin' Cajuns. So as much as you're able to bring down his attempts, Arnold Barnes had 11 attempts, and the best thing about all this, 0 loss by any of the running backs on a single play last week. Mario Williams on the trick play that didn't go anywhere, I believe lost a yard, although I think that was a penalty, so I'm not sure kind of why that's on there. So those plays bring down a little bit of the lost yardage, I guess, but the fact that your leading running backs, all their net yardage matches what their game was, because Jamari McClure on 10 attempts had 84 yards. And all, there was a long run of 29 by him, a long by Mekhi Hughes of 51. Mekhi Hughes averaging 7.9 yards a carry on that game. Jamari McClure, 8.5. Arnold Barnes, 7.5. That's crazy. And yeah, we can talk about the competition level of UAB till the cows come home. But the fact of the matter is you're seeing that talent out of Tulane. But to me, what I've seen more than anything else is the way that this wide receiver room has really formed as a whole, despite not exactly having a wide receiver 1. I think the obvious answer there early on in the year would have been to point to Mario Williams, and he certainly has his games, and you could easily make that case there. I've always thought the best offenses are ones in which you're able to spread the ball around, have different leading receivers every week. It makes it a lot harder for matching opponents to be able to just shut down the best receiver every single week. It's at this point unclear who Tulane is going to favor in a game. We spoke to Keith Brown after practice today, and I asked him about the fact that he was a leading receiver this week. It was the first time for him, but there's been a different leading receiver, in their 5 games. Dante Fleming has better, I'm sorry, 6 games. I have 1 through 6 written there, so that's special. Mario Williams led the first 2, then Dante Fleming, game 3, followed by Reggie Brown, who he had 1 reception, and it was a long, but that was against the Ragin' Cajuns, where Mario Williams had 5 receptions that day, but they didn't really go anywhere with 24 yards. That was kind of the point. Dante Fleming again against USF, and then Keith Brown in this game. And the touchdowns have gone all over the place because most of the weeks where the leading receiver hasn't been the guy that the touchdowns have gone to. So there's been a lot of different wrinkles out there. And I've really enjoyed that. I think it says a lot about the offensive coordinator and Coach Craddock. It says a lot about these wide receivers. I caught some tough love that Carter Sheridan was giving these guys on the Ragin' Cajun sideline. And it really seems to have resonated with them. Keith Brown saying he's really like a father figure to these guys. And just the buy-in by that room really showed. My favorite thing about the sidelines this last weekend was following, I honestly can't remember which touchdown it was by Keith Brown, because that game, there was so much happening. But that same drive, there was a stellar block by Bryce Bohannon where he absolutely pancaked an opposing safety on the ground. When I went over to watch what the wide receivers were looking at on film on those iPads after that play, they weren't looking at Keith Brown's touchdown reception. They were all hooting and hollering, knowing exactly what Carter Sheridan was about to pull up, which was that pancake block where I didn't actually see it in real time. I love the iPads. It's so interesting, but kind of peering my head over, I even watched him go all the way from the right side of the line of scrimmage completely to the other side and just, again, pancake this guy to the floor, 5'9", Bryce Bohannon. That is the effort and attitude, everything that we hear about with this team that you really want to see out there. And just as impressive, Bryce Bohannon was the second leading receiver against UAB. He had 2 receptions for 35 yards, but this game, they were really spreading the ball out. They weren't trying to complete that many passes. But the passes that Darian Mensah has gone for, they count. And his growth has been really, really just, I'm running out of words. This is what I said before. It's hard to talk about teams that are this great. His poise, I know we all kept talking about it, but to not get rattled by the hard hits, the hard decisions that he made that resulted in some very costly turnovers for this team against Oklahoma and Kansas State. There's a lot of quarterbacks that are way more experienced than that would start to see ghosts after a stretch like that. And I think you've seen him steadily grow by the week. I think his ability to sense pressure in the pocket and his shoulder maneuvers that he does to get out of these situations, but then he's still looking downfield and resets his eyes for the pass. And you can see him going through his reads. It's something even my dad could see when he was at the USF game watching the stands, was just his ability to scan the field and make those reads. He makes checks at the line of scrimmage. To have that amount of command in a redshirt freshman who has been able to lead this team to all of these convincing victories, because yes, he only threw for however many yards, 134 in this game. The week prior to that, he threw for 326 yards and 3 passing touchdowns. And that was on just a few more pass attempts. So I think what they've done is they've taken the very correct approach to a redshirt freshman quarterback, in which you're not going to ask him to go out there and throw 30 passes the first couple of games in order to win the game. So you start him off with a little more of a run-friendly game plan. It's also very helpful when you have the running back room that Tulane does. That, to me, it's the deepest one that at least I've seen. I've seen Tajay Spears and everything that he could do, but the different styles, the fact that you have 2 pretty big bruisers in Arnold Barnes and Mekhi Hughes, they're both getting a little faster this year. All of them are getting better as receivers. Shoddy Clayton Johnson could arguably be a slot receiver at this point. Trey Cornist offers you some power running ability. And then Jamari McClure, he is a little bit Tajay-esque in his shiftiness and his burst. Just to have all these different traits to be able to look at, it's really victors of the spoiled here. And we heard from today, Jon Sumrall, which thankfully, what happened with Alex Bauman, not expected to be anything as serious as what it looked like on the field. He said, nothing torn, nothing broken. Today, they're still doing some imaging and making sure about those things. But he brought up a really important point. And again, these iPads, really fascinating. They pulled the play up, and if his cleats had stayed in that turf, it would have been a very bad story for him. But actually, his cleats lifted up, and so they weren't stuck in that, because that was dense turf. I am a bit of an obsessor with turf sometimes, but we had noticed on the sideline, you couldn't move some of the chairs that were put in there because the turf had wrapped around them. It just makes me nervous when turf is that compact and wrapping over one another. So the fact that his cleats stayed out of that and he was on a boot at the end of the game. That was really important to see. Because he's been really important to this offense, both as a blocker and as a red zone threat, including just a threat at all times. He talked about his pass catch radius today, just the way he's really bulked up. What it does give is an opportunity for some of those younger tight ends to step up and really grow here. Again, for Reggie Brown, he's had quite a few receiving touchdowns at this point. Some of them have come from Ty Thompson, but you want to see a little bit more of that out of that room just outside of Alex Bauman. And so this allows that opportunity for that. And yeah, they got experience in that game, some part because of injury, but a large part because of they would have pulled him anyways at that point in the game. We were seeing an entirely outside of Caleb Thomas. We had a freshman center in there. We had completely backup offensive linemen in there midway through the third quarter. You cannot replicate that type of experience for your depth players. And what Tulane's been able to get out of both their starters and their depth players in these last 2 weeks, you really just can't ask for more. And to go quickly over special teams, hello, Rayshon Pleasant. It's unbelievable to see how crazy just these games have been for Tulane. The fact that they've had 4 pick sixes returned for touchdowns, which I'll get to with the defense, and 2 returns for touchdowns now by Rayshon Pleasant on special teams, who also has an interception return for a touchdown earlier this year, one of the 4 pick sixes for Tulane on the year. Incredible. His speed, it doesn't even look like he's running that fast when you rewatched the replay. But I've said this on the interception return that he had. He took a very similar path to Tajay Spears to the sideline where, yeah, he didn't hurdle player and then glitch his body midair, which I will never see anything like that UCF run for Tajay Spears. But I watched Rayshon Pleasant take it in a very interesting way through traffic and just a very similar sense of vision, field awareness to Tajay. And I think you see that on his special teams returns, but you also see his downfield speed and his burst. And it's just been incredible and such a boost for a team when you can get those types of returns on special teams. Someone that I also think has really grown from a special teams perspective, Dante Fleming, who I think has grown in all areas of the game, being the leading receiver in 2 games this season, where he barely played last year. He had a rough start to this season. Both, in special teams and receptions. He didn't have any in the first game, but immediately he came on in both phases. And what I've noticed is he's gotten confident enough where he's looking and scanning and trying to return the ball, and he's getting some credible returns now. And you're not seeing any penalties like we did on special teams that brought back some key returns in the earlier couple weeks. And quite honestly, it felt like those penalties at the end of the game were just a little obnoxious. And again, when you put in a lot of backups, you are just going to start having penalties here and there. But all things considered, I think that issue for Tulane, it has been qualmed, at least for now. Yes, the kicking situation, it's not great to be missing extra points, but it's also been a lot on the shoulders of a true freshman kicker in Ethan Head, who to start the year was supposed to split kickoffs with Patrick Durkin, who has been out for the first couple weeks of the year. Wasn't supposed to be kicking field goals or extra points. Jacob Barnes goes down against Oklahoma. It's a lot to ask for out of a true freshman. The good thing is Jacob Barnes was healthy and was the backup kicker. And so when things started to kind of go haywire on the extra point perspective, Jacob Barnes stepped in, didn't miss a beat. I believe it's Bryce Bush who is the punt holder. And I hope I'm correct on this one because I really want to credit how impressive that's been. There have been 2 games now where in game they have switched from a lefty to a righty. And Will Carroll used to be the holder. He was having trouble with the left-handed snap. And so that's why they went with that. But now they've had 2 games where that has swapped in the middle of the game. And that is easier said than done from everyone involved in that. It goes to show, again, Ethan Hudak's importance, the fact that they were also able to get the backup long snapper in this game. Andrew Goodman, I believe. I hope that that's correct. No, I went to actually just check because immediately I said that and I knew that Andrew Goodman was our long snapper that got injured earlier this year. It was not him. It was Thomas Peterson, who I don't know what's in the water with Tulane long snappers, but Thomas Peterson is 6'4", 260 pounds. That is a big guy at long snapper. I would be terrified of him as an opposing team on special teams, but Ethan Hudak is pretty big himself at 6'0", 229. Very big long snappers there for Tulane, but all things considered, I think from what was called abysmal kickoff coverage by Jon Sumrall in week 1, that has made a complete turnaround, and they are dangerous on special teams with their ability to score points with Rayshon Pleasant and Dante Fleming getting really key field position for this team now in multiple games. Moving on to defense, and I'm going to tie this in really with Jon Sumrall as well, just defensive-minded head coach. That was expected to be the strength of this team going into this year, and then it wasn't. And it was a little bit of a shell shock for people that were used to what was really a dominating defense for Tulane the last couple of seasons, dating back to the Cotton Bowl year, the game that set the tone for what I would say is this golden era of football. You look back to Bill Snyder Family Stadium, that's to me the game that changed it all for this history of what we're seeing right now. That game was a defensive masterclass with the tackles in that game. Single best, again, display of tackling I've ever seen. 4 fourth down stops. Just absurd play in that game. That was a cornerstone of Tulane. These first couple of games to start the year, you really didn't see that. The pass rush was relatively absent. You were getting nothing out of that bandit role. The linebackers, I think, were the point of strength for the first couple of years. Some missed assignments in coverage, and then the coverage was a little bit breaking down here and there over the first couple of weeks. As someone, again, I keep bringing up that I've done the Scouting Academy stuff with this, but because I've done defensive backs, I keep bringing it up because I do feel more qualified to speak on the assessment of these things because of the work that I've done with actually grading and film players and really understanding the intricacies of every single role in a secondary. It is easier said than done to all of a sudden have one returning player in your secondary in Bailey Despaney. Yes, very important for him to be at that safety role, but I was on the Uptown Update podcast yesterday. That is probably going to drop this week. They asked me who the biggest surprise for me this year was, and my brain went to Jack Chinshu. Just to have the amount of youth that Tulane has put out there in their secondary, him and Kevin Adams. Chinshu is a true freshman. Now he has an interception return for a touchdown himself. Kevin Adams is a sophomore. Those are true playmakers out there. And they've seen credible playing time since the Kansas State matchup in week 2. But that's a lot of communication that you're trying to get down with new corners. They have Michael Robinson, Jonathan Edwards, who, my goodness, he has 2 plays now this year where you want to talk about effort and athleticism. There should be 2 more touchdowns on the year on long explosive plays that Jonathan Edwards has chased down, not been the closest defender to that player both times. And it's been really incredible to watch what his speed is long like that. And just, again, the effort of not giving up to chase down a player. I think at least one of those 2 times it was at least held to a field goal. And then you've seen Rayshon Pleasant. You also saw Tulane putting out freshmen out there in the secondary. Caleb Bransaw got a little banged up, but he did go back in the game. But you saw Javion White go in his place and make one of the best interceptions I've seen in a long time, both in just reading it and the ball skills that he had. You've also seen Jaden Lewis get real playing time. I mean, we are talking about freshmen making plays for Tulane. That to me is really, really incredible. So the first couple of games, you saw some growing pains. You also saw a team allow 21 unanswered points, very much hold it all the way for Tulane to make it a 5-point deficit at the end of the game. All of a sudden, you saw Tulane's pass rush start to click a little bit. But that was a point of weakness for Tulane, I would say, up till USF. And to me, it is impossible to ignore the rehiring of consultant Mike Storms. I wrote a piece on Sports Illustrated about this. He is a 9th degree karate black belt. He was a United States Marine. The hand combat skills that he brings to this team, it's not a correlation, it is a causation. You cannot, it's just the immediate translation of what he has done with these guys. And it's fun being on the sideline and seeing this work. He came up to me before pregame and said, "Put your hand on my chest." All of a sudden, if you're watching the video, I just did a really embarrassing attempt of replicating what Mike Storms did with his hands. I had no idea what just happened. Posted a video on Twitter on the sideline that, watch that instead of what I just attempted to do. I noticed that as they were getting ready to go on, Pat Jenkins went up to him, Cam Hamilton went up to him, Eric Hicks, who's in the video I posted. They all did this crazy hand maneuver to chop, basically his hand off and ran all onto the field. Just the ferociousness of this defensive line in these last 2 games. And even though they had 3 sacks compared to the 6 against USF, you could feel the heat on every single play. Jalen Kitna, which not even touching any of that with the 10-foot pole because I am preserving my mental sanity in this bye week. He felt the heat from Tulane's defense. Matthew Fobbs-White, I went between him and Chris Rogers as my post-game player of the game, but for a role that has such intricate coverage responsibilities in addition to rushing the passer, all of the expectations, if we're going to talk about any on this team, I think they probably felt the pressure more than anyone else to perform at that bandit role. Tulane just wasn't getting that much production out of it. I noticed there was a long stretch during that game, and it was earlier on, all to say it wasn't just them kind of running out whatever when the score was totally out of hand, where Terrell Allen, who is also at that Bandit role, was actually playing defensive tackle alongside Matthew Fobbs-White at Bandit. And then they brought in Shaquem Lacer at Bandit and kept Allen there. He was actually commanding double teams pretty well. To me, that is just such a credit to the coaching and what all these guys have been able to put together. Because for a position group where you really couldn't find a starter for the first couple of weeks, you now have guys that are able to be on the field at the same time and maybe in a better suited role for Allen. I noticed that he was a little more at that interior at practice today as well. Elijah Champagne having one of the best interceptions I've ever seen. That wasn't a lob up in the air. Oh, let me locate the ball and just make sure I get it in my hands. That was a missile where he had basically no time to turn around and react because he was involved in the pass rush. Incredible reception by him. Just all phases of this team really clicking more than anything. And to me, that all starts and ends with the head coach. And it is safe to say that all expectations you could have had for Jon Sumrall, these last two games, and really just this season as a whole, have really blown it out of the water. And I keep going back to just the things that he says and these core values of this team, where attitude, toughness, discipline, and love, they really, really are rooted in this team. That is something that it's not just buzzwords. It is a foundation of core values that this team has really bought into. The love, I keep bringing it up, but just the relationships that these guys all have with one another, the fight that they have out there, the way that they have kept their heads through a 1-2 start. Yes, Jon Sumrall has started every season of his career like that, but this is only his third season as a head coach, which I will continue to point out as being incredible, but that was a different squad over at Troy. So he had to get these guys to buy in after a really tough start to this year, lock in the way that they did, buy into this new response to adversity, which I just continue to think so fascinating, where having good be the response to when things go wrong. That's a psychological thing that I just have to point out. Positive psychology, really, there is an entire branch called positive psychology, but words only matter so much as whether or not the team believes what they're saying. And if they're all just repeating good out there because they know that's what they're supposed to say, then it's meaningless. But you can tell that it really means something to them, and you're seeing the result of that take place in these last couple of weeks. And yes, it to me at this point is a core philosophy to me of Jon Sumrall is just the fight by his teams. I went back and looked at some articles from their Sun Belt championship run over at Troy, and it's eerie almost how much a lot of this stuff really echoes one another, where the players kind of agreed they needed a tough loss at the beginning of the year. It really brought their team together for this special run, but seeing that they could compete with the top team, but then also feeling the emotions of that loss, you could see the belief in that room, but you also saw like a hunger and a fight by these guys. And the players just also bringing up these core values and saying the biggest thing out of those is love. It's not a feeling, it's an action, sacrificing for your brother. And we're closer because of the hardships that we had to go through. This was another team of Jon Sumrall's, but you're already seeing a lot of those similarities take place here. And you're hearing these things from these guys over here. And it's safe to say to me, the buy-in is as fast and as expedited and as thorough as you could really ask for the start to a new era of Tulane, where again, we all keep saying this is the golden era of Tulane football, and this team is the perfect exemplification of that, where they've scored 116 points in the last 2 weeks. This is a domination in which I can't recall seeing, like I said, save for that final end of the year after that loss to UCF, where they just went and pummeled SMU, and it felt like they were unstoppable no matter what for the last couple of games that year. You're starting to get those feelings really early on here. So the question is going to be for this team, how do they handle all of this momentum and getting through this bye week and keeping focused? Because that's going to be really important. I think that they proved that trap games, at least early on, aren't an issue for them, because this game would have been a very easy one to say as that, where coming off the high of the 45-10 win, a team that is in shambles, sorry to UAB, but it's true. It would be an easy game for them to kind of show up and not look their Saturday best for. And this was as good as you could ask for from this team. It's a 4-2 that the two losses, again, those came to Kansas State and Oklahoma. Whether or not pollsters start to respect that, that's their problem. But in terms of what Tulane has laid out in front of them, their destiny is controllable, all things considered, where you can't talk about the college football playoffs unless you win your conference championship. By the time we get there, so much will have happened in college football. If Tulane can keep playing dominating games like this, you get to that stretch, you beat Navy, you beat Memphis, whether or not you host the conference championship or not, against Army, against what have you, but that's kind of where the tea leaves are going. And thankfully, Tulane gets to, at least it's not one of those things where you're looking at these top teams in the conference and Tulane only has played one of them. These guys haven't all really played one another. The good thing is that, Tulane, Memphis, and Navy will kind of knock themselves all out, as long as both Navy and Army don't stay undefeated, which in that case, Tulane would have beaten Navy. This whole thing is moot. And I think that it doesn't matter if Tulane plays for a conference championship on the road or at home, because now you've seen them put on such dominating victories in all types of environments, and they're really close as a team. To have that this early in the year, really feel like there is a sense of brotherhood. And I will say that the tempo at practice was as if, they hadn't just come off of a 51-point victory and don't have a game to play this weekend. They're as laser focused as you can ask for, and you really couldn't ask for more at this stage in the juncture. So with that, y'all, I will see you on Friday.